Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Mosaics, a project at American University's Justice Programs Office and funded by the Office for Victims of Crime. Our mission is to train criminal courts on improving outcomes for survivors of human trafficking who are facing criminal charges. I'm Megan Ward, Senior Program Associate, and joining me is Zoe Root, Mosaic's lead attorney, to introduce the purpose of today's webinar.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you all so much for joining our webinar today, especially in this particularly unique and challenging time. As Megan mentioned, the mission of Mosaics is to help criminal courts better respond to and reduce harm to survivors of trafficking facing criminal charges. Oftentimes, this means identifying the needs of survivors and linking them to social and legal services. But not all courts have a Rolodex of social service providers that they feel comfortable working with. Similarly, building a relationship between a court and a social service organization is not usually a seamless or organic process, and it can often be quite challenging. Building this type of relationship involves very intentional trust building and thoughtful conversations about roles and responsibilities. Our webinar today features 3 experts who will be discussing how courts and service providers can work in cooperation to respond to survivors' housing, safety, health, and other needs. Our discussion will be broken into 2 parts. In part 1, we'll be talking with 2 professionals that currently work within a court service provider partnership. They will share lessons learned from their own experiences building cross-system relationships. In part 2, we will review some practical tips to establishing and strengthening organizational partnerships. I would also like to take this time to mention that in addition to providing educational webinars like this one, Mosaics also offers personalized training and technical assistance for adult criminal courts looking to better serve survivors of human trafficking. So if you are a criminal court professional interested in our free training and technical assistance, please visit our website or send us an email. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Megan.
Thanks, Zoe. Some quick things to note about this webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and we welcome you to revisit the content and share it with your colleagues. Also, our presenters have prepared some helpful takeaway resources. Refer to the handout section of the GoToWebinar menu for these. We will be inviting your comments during the presentation via the polls and chat section on the menu. So be on the lookout for this as well. Now I'd like to introduce our first 2 speakers. Judge John J. Romero, Jr. serves in New Mexico's 2nd Judicial District Court in the Children's Court Division. In addition to serving on the board of directors of the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, Judge Romero has served as lead faculty on the National Judicial Institute on Domestic Child Sex Trafficking. Our second speaker is Marissa McTurk, and she is a case manager at the International Institute of Buffalo in the Survivor Support Services Program, a program that supports the efforts of survivors of human trafficking and domestic violence in their work towards safety and self-sufficiency. Marissa serves adult U.S. citizen human trafficking survivors, working closely with Buffalo City Court's Human Trafficking Intervention Court since 2016. This section is going to work by asking both Marissa and Judge Romero a series of questions, kind of like a panel discussion if we were in person. So Marissa, I'll direct the first question to you. what is the nature of your organization's relationship with Buffalo City Court, and how did you come to form that relationship?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. So I've been in this position for about 4 years, and when I started, our department was much smaller, so I was the only case manager that would even be present in the court at the time. And I think, for most service providers, that it can be a difficult area to navigate, especially when you're coming in as a new social worker. I wasn't 100% certain of what the expectations were going to be for me as a case manager from an outside agency, but I knew that the court was definitely a way that we were linked with a lot of vulnerable individuals who otherwise were not being connected to safety planning supports. So, with our court in New York State, we have the ability to go online and look at upcoming calendars. So it started with me going online every Friday and looking ahead at the next week's calendar. And if there was a survivor on the calendar who we were already linked with, I would plan on being present in court for whichever day they were scheduled for. Before I was working at IIB, the court had a structure for their human trafficking calendar that was to have those cases scheduled every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, morning and afternoon. So my plan was to be present for those 6 court appearances every week. And that sounds like a lot of time for a case manager to take out of their already busy schedule. And it is, but it was also super crucial in gaining access to those vulnerable individuals who may or may not have been trafficked, but either way may have needed some sort of support or not. And I think it was definitely crucial to building that partnership. I think the 2 key components I would say that helped us forge our partnership were consistency and reliability. So consistency being, attending court on the days that we plan to be there every week. And I think, along with attending court was communicating with our HTIC's coordinator once a week with any updates or concerns that we had about, a survivor that may have been in that court, as long as we had permission, obviously, to communicate with the coordinator. Because I think as social workers and attorneys and providers, we all have so much on our plates and a lot of people that we're serving. And it can be difficult sometimes to remember and keep it all straight. So I think a weekly check-in definitely goes a long way.
Great.
And I think that our program's definitely been fortunate to be able to adapt and expand over the past few years, where we now have another case manager that I can share my caseload with, which means sharing our court calendar. And, every human trafficking court around the country looks a little different and has maybe a different philosophy on how to do it and different populations that they're serving. But in Buffalo, in a single month, we link with so many survivors through this court that we realized it just made sense to expand and gain a case manager and be more available and more present.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you is, your consistency to show up for court, to be physically present in the courtroom when you are needed, and to communicate with the other stakeholders if you had concerns about a case was really helpful.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Yeah, and how overall did your organization, I believe it's called the International Institute of Buffalo, how did they get involved in the human trafficking intervention court in Buffalo?
So, excuse me. So in Buffalo, we have a task force, and so there's a lot of different individuals on that task force. Obviously, we have our human trafficking unit at our sheriff's office, Homeland Security, FBI, attorneys, legal providers. Our human trafficking court is on that task force, and the Institute was a key component in creating the task force and ensuring that it's operating efficiently, where we're all communicating with one another. And I think it was just a mutual understanding that we are, at least in Buffalo, we are the human trafficking experts, and we are the people that our primary goal is to provide services and support for those survivors. And if you have someone being brought in court, say they were being trafficked and they're being brought in on charges, and they're a small piece, but yet a big piece of potential investigation. You can't do an investigation without, a stable witness. And then to have a stable witness, they need to be connected to support. So, so it all just goes hand in hand.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it sounds like you guys were your organization was the spearhead of this task force, in which the court was a member, and you guys got hooked up that way. That's great. Judge Romero, what is the nature of your court's relationship with community service providers, and how did you come to form those relationships?
Thank you. And let me just say at the very beginning that the focus of my court is juvenile justice and child welfare. So it began perhaps back in 2013 with a couple of us raising the red flag and saying, children that are in foster care very often run away and go missing. Not only do these children disappear from their placements, but they come into the system with a not very technical term, boatload of trauma from the time they were born to the present. And we need to do something about getting on the same page with our child welfare organization and our community providers that provide services to the parents and to the children. While it was initially entertained as, wow, that's a great idea, we need to get together and talk about it, it really was difficult to make that happen because of everybody's busy. Happens all the time that everybody's busy. Nothing comes to fruition until we have a crisis, and of course we're learning about that firsthand nowadays. In October of 2014, the president signed into law the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act. Coincidentally, that happened shortly before the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges presented its first National Judicial Institute on Domestic Child Sex Trafficking. Before I left to go to that training, as a faculty member, one of the folks with child welfare said, we need to get together and talk. And I said, when I come back from this training. So all of a sudden it was something everyone was interested in, our child welfare agencies, of course, because they had certain compliance issues they had to contend with as part of the new legislation. Prior to that, in our community, the only thing that I knew that had been going on was the Attorney General's Task Force on Internet Crimes Against Children. Very narrow scope and very little involvement by community stakeholders that I was aware of. When I came back, it was agreed upon between myself and the Child Welfare Agency lead person that we should try to get all of these folks together in one place and talk about where we go from here. One of the things we discovered was that in our communities, there are many silos of service providers and potential stakeholders kind of all out there lone rangering it, doing their own little thing, and sometimes a duplication of effort and worst case scenario competition with each other for doing the right thing. The very first thing we did was had a meeting where a number of folks were invited in our community that we already knew were involved. That invitation came from me, from my court, and as the old saying goes, if a judge calls a meeting, they will come. And while there's no explanation for that, it's a good thing. Out of that, there was a decision to start collaborating and working together on other things that would make sense as an organized effort to deal principally with children in our community. But just because someone turns 18 doesn't mean they don't have the same issues they've always had as a child. So collaborating with our criminal division, adult court was another task that we had to deal with. Finally, because of the efforts of coming together in that fashion, community providers that dealt specifically with children, and then some that dealt specifically with 18 and older, were coming together and talking about how can we best serve the victims and survivors in our community. And that's still an evolving process. We don't have a specific court program in my court for survivors and victims. Some say that it's a good thing because the deeper you get into the juvenile justice system or the child welfare system, the more difficult it is to get out. So prevention and avoidance of the court system is perhaps the ideal strategy, but that's not the ideal world we live in. So how do you deal with children who are in our detention centers alleged to have committed a juvenile act, or children who are for their best interest in the child welfare system? That's an ongoing discussion. And I will stop there by simply saying that the National Council of Juvenile Family Court Judges in our institutes and in everything we do by way of judicial training is that getting together to communicate and collaborate and to ensure that what we're doing involves the stakeholders that need to be involved. And one of the things that is very obvious is that survivors and victims need to be at the table. They're the experts in their situation. We are not, and we need to give them credit and treat them with integrity and respect and make them equal members of anything that's being discussed leading toward a better path forward.
Thank you, Judge. Yeah, I think that's a very important part that, you know, for providers and courts who are coming together to talk about what a relationship would look like or what would benefit survivors who are charged with crimes, that a big part of that conversation should be survivors themselves, specifically survivors who have been in the position of being charged with crime. Thank you. And Marissa, the next question's for you. From your perspective, what are some points of tension or conflict for a service provider in working within the criminal court system?
Yeah, so I like this question a lot. When we initially began working closely with the court, we were definitely hesitant because of our philosophy, and we weren't sure what their philosophy was. But all we knew is that we didn't want to be a part of a diversion court. So my role is to provide intensive case management, which of course looks different for every survivor. And while our primary goal is always to address safety planning, we work from a person-centered approach, which means that we're working with the survivor on what they're identifying are their primary goals. So while one client might identify wanting to pursue an order of protection, say against their trafficker, another might want guidance on how to replace their New York State ID, right? So our philosophy is just to meet clients where they're at. Now, while our city's fortunate to have court practitioners who are genuinely caring about what the folks are that are coming into their courtroom, and they genuinely want to ensure that they're linked with support and safety and stability, this can also be a source of tension for a lot of courts around the country, because if we're requiring, you know, a survivor of trafficking, say, who's been charged with maybe prostitution or petty larceny or whatever the charge may be, if we're encouraging them to engage in services that they might not necessarily want, that's not giving the survivor the choice that they deserve. So I think that'll always be sort of a source of tension. You know, I think initially when we started this partnership, there was an initial expectation for us to meet with clients 5 times while they remained in an open case with the court. And I'm not speaking for the court, but we're perceiving that this was to ensure that folks were engaging with supports, so that maybe once they were discharged, the court knew that they had a linkage if they ever needed it in the future. As I've mentioned, our agency is working from person-centered, trauma-informed approach, which means that they have the choice, which means for us, our services will always be voluntary. So rather than requiring a client to meet with us 5 times in person, we might meet with them once in person and have 2 phone calls. And they might not want anything to do with us after that, and that's okay. But, you know, now years into our partnership, there's a mutual understanding that if the client chooses not to engage, that's their choice, and they're not penalized by the court for that, which is great.
That's great. And so how did you, maybe you could share a little bit how you got the court to adopt your philosophy in that sense?
Yeah, I think that I think that we're lucky here in Buffalo because we have a judge who is genuinely open to our feedback and genuinely wants to hear. She wants to hear from us as a partner, but also from survivors, right, about what is working for them in that court and what is not. So we've just been lucky where we have, our director's a great person to stand up for staff, but also just to relay concerns if there were any to the judge, and the judge is super receptive to having those conversations, whether it be over the phone or say, in person. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah. I'm really glad to hear that there's some give and take in that relationship, because in any working partnership, that would be expected, right? That give and take. Okay, well, we, see it this way, and this is our area of expertise, and so we would like you to honor this part of our philosophy. So that's great.
Right.
Great. And Judge Romero, from your perspective as a judge, what are some points of tension or conflict for the court in working with service providers?
First and foremost, I think it's a lack of understanding of what what our service providers, community service providers, what obstacles, limitations, and rules they may function under, expectations that are not realistic. Similarly, while some providers spend a lot of time in court, they're feeling, they're like the blind men feeling the elephant. They understand the part that they're feeling, but there's much more going on in court, other priorities, other things that take place that don't allow a particular judicial officer or other court professionals to drop everything they're doing and jump to action. So I think, as has been emphasized throughout, communication ongoing always, and coordination and collaboration on what we do, planning ahead of time, avoids some of those confrontations or misunderstandings. And it's always a work in progress, an evolution that we need to work together and ensure that we all understand our separate and distinct roles while we're working toward a common goal of providing a positive outcome for the victims and survivors. I echo what was previously said, that the survivors and victims know better than we know what they need. Unfortunately, when you're court involved, if you say, gee, thank you very much, but I'd really not rather do that, it's typically followed with some sort of a heavy-handed sanction or consequence that is negative if you as a victim or survivor fail to do what you've been ordered to do. In some of the community providers' protocols, those who contract with our state agencies, they've had for a long time a one bite at the apple approach. Here's what we're going to do for you, even if it's not what you need. You have one chance to get with the program, and if you blow out of it by simply not doing it or not putting your full effort into it, don't ever darken our doorway again. And that absolutely does not work with any victim or survivor. I believe a question we need to ask ourselves, whether we're court personnel or community providers or other stakeholders, if this were my child with these issues, how would I want that child to be treated? And I'm a parent, grandparent, and a great-grandparent, and I don't think with any of our kids, even though we wanted to throttle them sometimes, the door was always open. If they took off and thought they were going to do their own thing, they were always welcome back. And an unconditional love approach to how we deal with these victims and survivors. Some version of that is something we need to all practice, and sometimes it is a point of contention or conflict with our community providers, with our judges, with probation officers, with social workers in the child welfare agency. But again, getting together, talking about it, coordinating it is what makes a difference.
Yeah. And is there a particular, I just want to affirm what you said, Judge, that as our understanding of trauma evolves and how that affects person's ability to make commitments or to try something out. What that does as a person hopefully will, service agencies, courts will be able to respond better to serve people, especially who have been through trauma. Is there any cross-system education that you would recommend for courts or service providers when trying to, set the rules or establish the bounds of the relationship?
At the expense of sounding a little bit self-promoting, the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges has a multitude of trainings on trauma, complex trauma, particularly with first do no harm as a court system, re-traumatizing those who are already dealing with complex trauma and have been traumatized. The National Council has a very flexible trauma audit, trauma training that can be done for an entire courthouse, for one judge in their courtroom, what goes on in their courtroom, for a program that is a diversion program, which again, better to have something other than having them court involved. But that's one program. I'm sure there are many others out there that deal with not just being trauma informed, because being informed doesn't do any good. Being trauma responsive, along with being trauma informed, and how we deal with this very specialized group of young men, young ladies, boys and girls that we shudder to think it goes on, but it's part of reality.
Well, thank you, Judge. Marissa, what do you see as the benefits or successes of your relationship with the court? To summarize, why form this relationship?
So I think one, obvious factor is that having this partnership has definitely led to a much easier, faster referral process for our clients when it comes to other linkages they might need, whether it's inpatient treatment. Majority of my clients here in Buffalo, the adult survivors of trafficking, there's definitely a lot of substance use happening and a lot of addiction that they're struggling with. Or, if they need linkages to get their insurance recertified, maybe they want a GED program, whatever it is that they need help with, having the court as a partner very often makes that linkage so much easier and faster to happen. I'd also say, we have more direct referrals to other safety linkages that we need. And I think that I would say that there's more willingness if there's a prostitution charge happening for that to be dropped. Something else that's super great that's come out of this partnership is we have easier linkages for mental health services for our clients who I think it can be exhausting for them to have to go from court to outpatient to, whatever appointments they're mandated to go to or have to go to. But often they do want mental health treatment. And sometimes just having that counselor meet them face to face at the court as just an introduction goes so far for them to be comfortable and ready to take that step to start their counseling. I'd also say, like I've said before, having a judge who is so open to change in these discussions, it goes so far because they understand that the barriers that our clients are facing. So if say, this is a perfect example of someone who is in an abusive relationship at home and say they have a black eye and they don't want to come to court. We have such a good partnership with our court where the client can relay that to us and we can relay to the coordinator, without even getting into details, it's not safe for them to come to court today. Can you please not issue a warrant? And they'll reschedule it. So that's building trust with our survivors where they're more likely to come into court or maybe, less likely to fear the court with a system that they otherwise might not have had any positive experiences with before. And I think my last takeaway of this partnership is that, one of our goals is always to help clients trust other providers. And I think with this court partnership, we're seeing that more and more. They're not only trusting us as advocates who are separate from the court, but they're trusting the court to help them and believe them for once.
Well, Marissa, thank you for sharing those takeaways. I love that. It sounds like you have gotten a lot of benefits from that relationship, even working around the areas of conflict and tension. So thank you for sharing. And Judge, what about you? What do you see as the benefits or successes from your relationship with community partners?
The benefit, I believe, is that we are working together collaboratively to meet the needs of a very unique population, and also to create a greater awareness among all of us of how different stakeholders address their part of the issue that they're dealing with. It gives us a better appreciation and a greater understanding of the obstacles we all face, but a commitment and a determination to not re-traumatize, to do no harm, and to work together as a community of those entities that touch the lives of these victims and survivors, so that better outcomes are a possibility.
And it sounds like you're saying that the community partners have played a role in helping court or criminal justice involvement be less traumatic for survivors. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. Quite frankly, if I have a young person before me in court and I have basic information and I have a suspicion that they are being trafficked or that they are at risk for being trafficked, the last thing I want to do is say that and ask that question in open court on the record in a courtroom full of folks who don't have any business knowing what the answer to that may be. Quite frankly, somebody in the courtroom may be the trafficker themselves. So to have an agency like Melissa's, who has an awareness of what's going on with this particular young person, and to deal with them in a much more trauma responsive way outside of the courtroom, and for me to know that she's in the community, to have someone from my court staff or me myself communicate with Melissa and say, here's what I think is going on. You don't need to give me the answer, but if this person needs assistance that you all are uniquely qualified to provide, please see if you can help them. So having a relationship with community providers, having our probation services and our child welfare entities have those relationships with the community providers. And by the way, sometimes we judges know who those community providers are before the other court professionals do, probation and child welfare. So we basically give them the information and they can follow up to collaborate themselves with them, so that it's not a matter of public record in our court.
Great. Yes, great. I think that's a very important point, Judge. Thank you. And thank you, Marissa, as well, for sharing your experience and insights with us. We really appreciate it. Okay, now we'll hear from Monica Arenas. Monica is a program manager at Futures Without Violence, working on the Social Justice Project. Monica has participated in the development and implementation of training programs and technical assistance on human trafficking multidisciplinary collaboration to assist adult victims of human trafficking. We are very excited to have her here with us today to discuss some practical tips to establishing and strengthening organizational partnerships to better serve trafficking survivors. Monica, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for participating. Good morning or good afternoon. And thank you, Judge Romero and Marissa, for sharing your experience. I will share briefly about collaboration strategies to support survivors of human trafficking, and this will kind of reiterate what you have heard and what you may already know as well. and also that someone can be a victim of both labor and sex trafficking, as well as many other abuses, so including domestic violence and sexual assault. So I will be speaking from that notion, and that's how we have been addressing human trafficking within that intersection. So first, we will start with the next slide, with redefining success in helping survivors or victims of human trafficking. So as mentioned, success is measured by our efforts to reduce isolation and improve outcomes for the health and safety of the survivor or victim. And as Marisa mentioned, our goal is not to fix people's problems or tell them what to do, but to empower the survivor by offering options and also increasing their safety and starting with their immediate needs. And this is part of being survivor-centered, and it includes also a balance of freedom or choice with personal responsibility, as well as accountability for the systems that are providing the support. And then next, in the next slide, we will review also briefly what is safety, and re-examine that. So violence happens in a cycle. So abusive relationships may have happy and loving moments, so leaving or ending relationships is more dangerous or altering than continuing to survive the abuse. But it's not always people's priority. So people may feel like staying is their only option in order to maintain housing, relationships with their children, or some income, even if it's very little. So as they see no other option or way out. So why is this important that providers consider these elements of the experiences of survivors? So this is so we can check ourselves from placing judgment on a survivor's choices. Expressing judgment may only outrage the person, and this has been mentioned already, but we just wanted to review this with you. So human trafficking advocates and domestic violence and sexual assault advocates are experts in short and long-term safety planning, and so they have a role. And so let's move away from asking why hasn't the survivor left to asking how can I support this person so that they can make their own decisions. So thinking in that way is very helpful. And now let's review briefly the needs of survivors to help recognize the need to build relationships and collaborate with others in order to support the survivor's needs. And as mentioned, each individual has unique needs, and this list presents some of the key needs: advocacy and safety, legal needs, T visa, criminal history and expungement, repatriation, protection orders, possibly custody issues, and self-sufficiency, including employment, job training, education, and then health, very important or key as well, substance use, dental, chronic health issues. And then we'll also see housing and shelter, short and long-term housing. So for human trafficking survivors, so case management or other types of support often have a longer time frame or duration, and can be impacted by the criminal and legal process. So that's one of the reasons that it's important to collaborate with others to keep that support for the short and long-term process. So in the next slide, we have a poll that we would like for you to please check. We would like to find out, do you think your program is able to meet the needs of the following victims or survivors? So please fill out. We have, select, are you your organization or program serving American Indian, Alaska Native, LGBTQ survivors, youth, adults, U.S.-born survivors, foreign-born. Then there's a second part to this as well, just a quick poll.
Great. Thanks everyone for their responses. So Monica, it looks like about 91% of people on this call serve U.S.-born survivors, and about 60% are able to serve foreign-born survivors with different language needs. And in the 70% range, people are able to serve LGBTQ plus survivors and youth and young adults. About 43% or 44% are serving Alaskan Native survivors, American Indian survivors. We'll close this poll and launch the next one. Okay. And this is the second half of the poll. Do you think your program is able to meet the needs of the following victim survivors? Wow, getting great participation. We're almost at 50% participation, which is great. Okay, looks about like half the people have filled out the poll. And yeah, 95% of people are serving survivors of sex trafficking, are able, 68% are able to serve survivors with disability. 76% can serve survivors with substance use disorders. And about 64% can serve survivors of labor trafficking. And 60% serve survivors in rural settings.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I think your programs are maybe stronger with any particular population, sex trafficking or domestic or labor trafficking. So this is an opportunity to also think about where do you have room to grow, since all of these people in your in communities, however small or large, exist in your community. So if you're not serving them, who is? And if you come across one of these survivors or victims, whom can you refer this to for support if you're not able to meet their needs? And there are maybe already as well groups in the community that have a higher need or is vulnerable, and now also that other organizations are serving. So thank you for sharing. So this is an opportunity for you to think about the communities in your, or the groups in survivors in the community. So now in the next slide, we will review 3 steps to engage in collaboration and to build partnerships to support survivors of human trafficking. So as a first step, you need to do an internal review of the capacity of your court or program or support survivors of human trafficking. So it may be helpful to put together a team that can help lead this task, to review your role and limitations, what is currently in place, and what support can your court or program provide, and also what services do you need to partner and refer to others. Do you need to update your case management strategies? How about your policies, protocols? Do you have MOUs in place already with some organizations? And what do you need to develop or update? It can also help to include assessing for gaps, staff readiness, and need for training. And you may already have reviewing this, and this is also an opportunity to look at the intersections of human trafficking with domestic violence and sexual assault, as well as the services and collaborations that you may already have in place to support survivors, and also the overlap that can be adapted and also serve survivors of human trafficking. So that's the first step. And the next step is involves identifying and mapping services and resources in your community to meet the needs of survivors. And this is what you have on the screen is more of an outline and of a handout that you have and that you can download. And it lists the different needs of survivors and who can meet these needs. A provider, do I have a contact? This is just to help you if you haven't done this already. And where have you established relationships? And also what services would be best to support the survivors that you work with, what you offer internally, as well as what partnerships you can leverage. And so in terms, for example, your community or county might have a community-based domestic violence services agency, a women's substance abuse or a mental health treatment program, or a runaway and homeless youth and services organization, or legal services. So all of those, it's important to map out and identify these programs and build the relationships. And then if there's a lack of services in your jurisdiction, and especially I heard also that there are several rural programs participating. So even, going within your county or state, helping identify these resources within your that can support survivors in your community. And also, if there are gaps, looking into building the capacity to serve certain victims through a specialized training, grant opportunities, or building collaborations. And also, as mentioned, we'll mention also about in terms of joining collaboratives that may already exist in your community. So in the next slide, we have possible collaborative partners to meet the needs of survivors. And I mentioned several of this already. And based on your community and demographics, there are many potential partners. And the service needs of trafficking survivors are best met through a multidisciplinary approach coordinated by a client's case manager or a point person, so always centering on the needs of the survivor, as mentioned. So here we list, the healthcare, legal services, social services. So when we think about legal services, other partners may include systems such as child welfare, courts, of course you and different programs within the court system as well, juvenile justice and public defenders. So ensuring that a public defender is very important, but it's not everything. So human trafficking survivors have a host of legal needs. So in immigration, for example, immigration, housing, court, and family court. And so they should get connected to civil, legal, and providers who can help with all of them. So it's important also to build the referral network, as well as a protocol for making and receiving these referrals. And of course, building relationships. And also, when identifying these resources, it's also important to ensure that the services are trauma-informed and that the program has the capacity to support survivors of human trafficking. There are some instances in some communities where some programs are, trying to support survivors, but are building their capacity, but are not there yet. So assessing that as well. And so in next slide, we will reiterate again what Marissa mentioned, and also, the role of the advocates as a key person or in your collaboration with legal services and human trafficking and domestic violence and sexual assault programs. So they have vast experiences working with survivors of violence, as you know. So identify established human trafficking program in your community to talk with advocates and learn more about their services they provide, the language spoken and safety planning, training, and resources provided. So if you don't know who to contact or what programs exist in your area, you can also look at the national hotline and resources in the list in the handout that we are providing. So advocates are many times available to accompany the survivor to court dates and medical appointments, social services, and this is just a repetition or a review of what Marisa mentioned and what you already know, but just to reiterate. So now we'll go into step 3 in the next slide. So we have a chat for that we would like to hear from you. What are the different agencies with whom you're collaborating with, or that you work with in your community? So if you could please type in the chat box what organizations or service providers you're collaborating with. Do people have access to the chat? Oh, here we have one person.
That's me.
Okay. I'm not sure. I'm not seeing any message. So maybe we'll continue and then wait to see that you can figure out the chat and enter whom you're collaborating with, and then we can review that as well briefly. So step 3, establish and formalize your partnerships, and this is, as mentioned, build connections to link survivors with resources, clarify confidentiality needs and limitations, very important that each service provider or organization has, review that, cross-train staff on your organization services, and as mentioned, also identify a single point of contact within each agency to ensure coordination of services and one referrals. And formalize this referrals process to avoid any survivors that don't fall between the cracks. And also, when appropriate, court personnel can meet with the heads of the agency to better understand the scope of services and how to make referrals as well, and follow up. And then also in the next slide, we have additional points. So promote procedures and policies that support survivors with their trauma and are victim-centered, as mentioned as well already. Develop confidentiality and safety protocols with your partnerships, and communicate. And of course, planning and clarification of roles is very important. And also to formalize your partnerships, let's put it in writing through an MOU if necessary, or it's very helpful. Additionally, we have not highlighted this, but Marisa did mention that if possible, join or partners or participate in your local anti-human trafficking task force or collaborative. Find out if there's one. If you're not part of one, you might be already part of one. This can be helpful to build relationships and improve communication and build support for your core program as well. So I'm looking at the chat and I don't see any messages. Maybe it's not working for some of you. Or do you see any chats that I'm not hearing or seeing?
I think they ended up in the questions box. So I'm seeing that some people have answered that they are partnered with mental health programs, substance abuse treatment programs, child and family services, recovery house programs, health clinics, clothing, food banks, churches, which is great. That's all from one person. Another person says that they are connected with the county's task force. Another user said an advocacy center, our local tribe, schools in our county, and other nonprofits. Another participant said the tribe also provides substance use disorder treatment, MAT, which is the type of therapy, and mental health services. I'm going to read a couple more. Somebody is partnered with their jail, their HT, the Human Trafficking Task Force, parole and probation, and advocates. So it looks like a lot of people have some pretty robust partnerships between community service providers and the courts or the criminal legal system.
That's great.
That's great.
Well, we hope, we hope this is helpful as well, just as a review, and that the resources that we're sharing with you as well are helpful in formalizing those relationships or enhancing those relationships. And not all partners require the same engagement. Some partners, as advocacy and legal are key partners. Others may have more a limited role within partnerships. So to summarize, in the last slide, we have the key points that we have reviewed. So as mentioned, survivors of victims have different needs in order to provide support and improve their health and safety. It is important to identify the capacity of your court program and map the services that are available in your community, and build formal relationships to strengthen the coordination of the services. And also, I think to highlight what was mentioned, the importance of collaborating with survivors and victims, and also that they can play a role within your collaboration within a task force if they're not part of that, through different ways. And so the handout has a list of resources that can be helpful, and also to assess your capacity or gaps. And so now I will just review briefly in the next slide the resources that Futures Without Violence has in terms of support for service providers. We have many webinars that we have organized, and resources and templates, and we are also available for technical assistance and training. So you have my contact and a link to the website also for resources. So thank you. I think that's all that I have, and so thank you for participating.
Monica, thank you so much. That was very helpful. And I really encourage everyone to visit the handout section in the menu bar to download the resources that Monica was referencing during her presentation. Thank you again to everyone who joined us for today's webinar. Marissa, Judge Romero, Monica, thank you again for sharing your experiences and bringing your knowledge here today. To close out, I want to remind folks that justice professionals can receive more training from us for free. Please email us at mosaics@american.edu for more information. Thank you to all, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.